Hi, BookTube. Welcome back to my channel, Books, Ink, and Paper. I'm Lori, and today I'm going to tell you what I read in January and how much I liked it and what I didn't finish in January that I did like and just didn't get complete with. Some of these I've talked about in another video, and I have a pretty detailed review about at least two of them on Goodreads. So I would encourage you to take a look at that, but I'll briefly talk about them again today. So the first book I read and finished in January was The Dutch House by Ann Patchett. Ann Patchett is a favorite of mine, and I was highly anticipating this release. She doesn't release books every year or every couple of years like some authors do, so it's been a while since we've had a new Ann Patchett. And oh my goodness, this was so satisfying. I really just love her style. I love the way she can create characters that I care about. I love that she created this family saga, which I also love. I love that it was narrated by one of the main characters, and I loved his perspective of it. It did jump from timeline to timeline, and for some people, some authors, that would have been pretty tricky, but not for Ann Patchett. I felt like she handled that deftly. It wasn't a big leap in time sometimes, and she did go back and forth in their in their lives. But so the story follows Maeve and her brother. Oh my gosh, Danny. Moment where I forgot. Maeve and her brother Danny, and their dad Cyril buys a home called the Dutch House after the war and moves his family into it, and his wife really hates the house, and Maeve has some big sisterly motherly duties because her mom isn't really particularly attentive to them always, and actually would leave for periods of time and disappear, and they wouldn't kind of know where she was, and their dad would say she was just visiting friends or whatever, and then she would come back and doesn't come back into their lives at all. And so they grow up with people who are in the home hired by their parents to care for them, and they have their own special place in this family saga. And it's a story of in adulthood, looking back on their childhood, looking back at this house, what happened to their family. Fantastic. I highly recommend it. I gave it 5 stars. Then I finished an arc of My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. I've done an in-depth BookTube video about this book. I've lent this to a family member, so that's why there's still a bookmark in it. Somebody else is reading it, but huge trigger warnings for sexual assault. Really difficult read. Well done. Maybe a little more intense in description of some of the sexual abuse that occurred in this novel than I would have needed. So again, a fuller review of it on my channel, but a very well done debut novel about a very tricky topic, and a story that was told in a way that really does help people understand, I think, the dynamics of the victim in relationship with the perpetrator, and it helps you to understand how what is a simple relationship becomes an abusive relationship, and how the victim's thoughts progress through that is really handled well in this. So I gave it 4 stars. I think that the bump down of stars, it was compelling to read. I finished it fast. I think the bump down was really because I don't know that it needed to have that much graphic detail about their sexual relationship, but that's just me. For my winter cozy reading night, I picked up A Stranger in the House by Sherry Lapina. This is an author that I like, and I've read a few of hers last year. I've read The Couple Next Door a couple of years ago. I read An Unwanted Guest, and I read, what was the other one I read last year? I can't remember. Anyway, I picked this up for warm winter cozy reading night, and got about halfway through it on that night. So it was a quick read. It's not long. It's short chapters, and it's a pretty compelling story. I did not love this one as much as some of the others by her I have enjoyed. It was good. I gave it 3 stars. Here's what I think was tricky about it for me. It was written in the first person present tense for every character. So it follows a woman who gets a phone call, and she's cooking dinner, and she leaves her house, and then she's in a car accident and doesn't remember what happened. She has amnesia about what happened. It follows her husband and his reaction to what happened. There's a death and a murder that occurs while she doesn't remember where she was and what she was doing. And then there's also a separate storyline with the detectives and the neighbor. And I think that's the main thrust of it. But they're all first person present tense. So it's a little awkward. I don't know if you feel that way, but I feel that way because I'm used to a novel being, written in third person, and I'm used to a novel being in past tense more frequently. So it was just, I don't know, it was a little awkward, but kudos to her for giving that a shot, because it's not a tense that people use often in writing. This came out in 2017. It says it is her second novel, and I'm glad I read it, and I'm glad I got it in December and read it quickly. So it's finished, and it was okay. Then on ebook, I read The Better Liar by Tannen Jones, which I had started in December. It was an advanced reader's copy from NetGalley. So it was published January 14th. So look at me getting an advanced reader's copy read before it was released. So that was fun. I did like this book. It took me a bit to get into it. It took me a bit to like the characters. When I first started it, I didn't really care for either one of them. And then they kind of grew on me. And once I got to a certain point, then it was easy to complete and finish. So it was a little slow start for me, but I think just because I didn't really love either one of them. Okay, so it follows a sister named Leslie who has a sister named Robin, and they've been estranged for a while. Robin had gotten into some trouble and had moved away, and they didn't ever see or hear from her unless she needed money. And their dad dies and leaves them an inheritance, but they both have to be present in order to claim the inheritance. And so she has, at the beginning of the book, has been tasked with having to go to Las Vegas to see if she can find her sister Robin. So you hear her perspective, you hear Robin's perspective. So she meets another character in Las Vegas pretty quickly after the shock of finding out that her sister is dead. She leaves the scene. She doesn't tell anyone anything about her sister. She discovers her sister has been using an alias, another name. And so nobody technically knows that her sister is dead, which is good for her because she needs the inheritance. So then she meets a woman named Mary as she's kind of recovering from all of this, and she definitely needs and wants that inheritance money. And so she meets Mary, and over the course of about a weekend, they agree that Mary will impersonate her sister Robin so that she can get the inheritance and she'll share part of it with Mary. So it's a pretty interesting plot, I will say. And again, you get all of the perspectives. You get Robin's perspective from when she was younger. You get Leslie's perspective from when she was younger and now. And then you get Mary's perspective of she's learning about Leslie and her husband and her child. And Mary's Mary's a very interesting character. And again, at first I didn't really like her, but she grew on me, and Leslie grew on me, and I really found that I enjoyed it. And overall, I gave it 4 stars. And I did a review on Goodreads for this, and I got a little bit more of my NetGalley bookshelf read. So that was very, very good for me. I listened to The Strange and Beautiful Sorrows of Ava Lavender by Leslie Wilson, which was on my backlist. And I talked about this in my TBR video for January. It was on my backlist. I'd put it on a few years ago, and somebody, I think it was Sarah from Sarah's Nightstand, was picking it up. And I thought, oh, that would be a good one for me. I found it on audio and listened to it. And I'm glad I listened to it because it is a beautifully written book. It has a lot of very descriptive, lovely literary language. So I really, really enjoyed it. And I don't know if I would have had the same experience reading it, but I probably would have. So it follows a young girl named Ava Lavender who's actually born with wings. Her mother is stunned to discover, as she's giving birth to this child alone without any support, that the child has wings. And at first you might think that's odd, but then as you read a little bit more, you discover that she researches a little bit more of the backstory about her grandmother and discovers that one of her grandmother's siblings was actually a bird and not a human. So her grandmother has this story that sort of kicks it off of all of her birth and life with her siblings and all the things that happened to them and how they found themselves in the place where they live, which is outside of Seattle. And then the story of Ava's mom and how she and her life unfolded in this community, and who she loved, and who she spent time with and what she did, and lovely story. And then you discover how she became pregnant and how she became a single mom alone with giving birth to Ava and handling Ava's special abilities. Ava also has a brother, Henry, who is her twin, and Henry has his own special stuff going on. And then you hear about Ava's life and you read about how she grew up, or hear or listen to how she grew up and how she came to sort of come out of her house, because having wings was not something that was accepted widely in the community, right? So they all had very special abilities. They all had very special stories, and it's a young adult fantasy, and it was lovely. It was really, really lovely. I will say I gave it 5 stars, but then I thought about it as I was listening to it, whether or not I would recommend it to my granddaughter, who is now 13. And I don't know yet, because it has some pretty tragic circumstances in it. So it's got some pretty violent kinds of tragic themes, I would say. But then I think about what she's exposed to in the world and in, just, so many tragic things happen all over the place. So I don't know. And I wondered if she would really attend to it, because the book she's reading right now, for example, is To All the Boys I've Loved Before, which is, not a bad book. It's just a little bit different in scope. And so I don't know. But it is a young adult fantasy. It won several awards. It won the William C. Morris YA Debut Award in 2015. It won the Goodreads Choice Award for Young Adult Fantasy and Science Fiction for 2014. The Penn Center USA Literary Award for Children's and Young Adult Literature in 2015. So very well received. A lot of my Goodreads friends who've read it gave it 5 stars also. I highly recommend it. And again, the audio version is very lovely. It really does unfold in a very magical story-like way. And then the last book that I finished, actually the very last day of January, I read it in one day. It's very short. It's called The Yamas and Niyamas, and it's written by Deborah Adele. This has been on my Kindle for ages. I picked it up because my daughter Megan went to a Breathe for Change yoga experience a few years ago to bring yoga back with her into the school that she teaches for, and it was one of the books that they recommended. So the yamas and the niyamas are the ethical sort of tenets of the sevenfold path of yoga, and so they are the things that you want to not have in your life and the things that you want to have in your life. So for example, one of the yamas is non-violence. So you want to take violence out of your space. And one of the niyamas is contentment. So you want to bring more contentment in. And there are exercises for you to go through as you are taking these in and living your life more intentionally, thinking about these things that are getting in the way of having a sort of a present, well-balanced, happy, contented life. The reason I never finished this before is because I started it and then I would try to get to the exercises and think I had to not go on until I finished them. And then of course I would get distracted by the exercises and not get them done. And so Megan was rereading it the other day and was talking about it. And she was reminding me how much I enjoyed it when I first started it. And she said, don't stop and do the exercises and get all involved in that. Just read the whole thing once through and then go back when you feel like it and look at the specific yamas and niyamas that you want to focus on and do the exercises for that month or a couple of days or whatever it is that you want to do. And that made great sense. So I thought, oh, that would be good. I'm going to get a book off my Kindle because my Kindle TBR is pretty big. And it's a good time for me because it's the start of the year and I'm really thinking this, more mindful, intentional life is what I want to focus on this year as well. Loved it, listened to it, as well as read it on ebook. It's really not long. I think it's maybe 4 hours long if you were listening to it, and it's not a big book. So I finished it in one day and I did really enjoy it and I learned a lot, and I discovered that she coaches clients, and so I want to learn more about Deborah Adele and what she does and how she came to be. It is interesting how her life with a very intentional yoga practice, as well as coaching, as well as kids and grandkids and adult kids and grandkids as I have, and just I just really appreciated it, and so I gave it 4 stars. Then I did pick up the Grantchester Mysteries. The first one is Sidney Chambers and the Shadow of Death by James Runcie. This was on my TBR for the month, and I have read 168 pages of the 392, so I'm not halfway done yet. I like it. It's not a fast read for me for some reason, and it's not what I expected. So it is a series of mysteries that he solves, probably much like the series on PBS. I think it's just sort of this is kind of what happens in his little town. It's interesting to me that all these mysteries that are set in London or England, in some little place in England, somebody ends up Midsummer Murders is one. This is a priest. Midsummer Murders is the detectives. Agatha Christie's too, of course. All of those murders that happen in these small little communities. Not very realistic, I hope, for people that live in England, but this is fun and I like it, and I'm going to finish it. I just did not finish it in January because it got pushed aside by some of the other books that were a little bit faster for me to get through. But I'm going to keep on it, so it's going to carry over into my TBR for February. So I think that is all I read in January, and a little bit of a synopsis about how I felt about them. It was a good reading month. I feel like I'm back on track. I also feel like I probably read more books this month than I wanted to in terms of savoring. So stay tuned for February. Thanks for joining me today. Let me know if you've read any of these or if you plan on picking them up because of my reviews of them. And as always, happy reading. Bye.